History is our best teacher. Throughout history, there are countless examples of success and failure. However, sometimes we can summarize history in a few principles. Today, I will show you 7 things you can learn from history. Let's start from the first one. If you carefully look through history, most of the disasters that happened were political. Think about the Inquisition, the Holocaust, Stalin's purges, and of course, 9/11. All of those things were caused by charismatic leaders who brainwashed their followers to commit inhumane acts of terror. They convinced their followers that the issues within their country is caused by outsiders, and they're ruthless towards anyone who dares to challenge them. If you're above the voting age, I need to remind you that your vote is very powerful. Sometimes it can be the difference between a nation succeeding or failing. North Korea has a military of 2 million. Their people literally starve to death. On the other hand, a country like Australia might only have a military of 60,000 soldiers. However, we have one of the highest GDPs. I think what I'm trying to tell you is very obvious. Economic development should always be prioritized before military power. Throughout history, many strong military powers have failed, not because they were defeated by force, but because their economy collapsed, because they couldn't pay for any more wars. For example, Japan in the 1930s was an extremely strong military power, expanding its borders to northeast China and the Pacific. But at that time, the Japanese people were forced to sell their children because of poverty. In context, Carthage could lose 2 Punic Wars and still survive, thanks to its developed economy, and I'll also mention Carthage later. In his 30s, Pompey the Great has already had 3 military parades celebrating his success. In his 50s, he was killed in Egypt. Why? Well, he became too arrogant and made a lot of enemies. And his allies also betrayed him, most notably Julius Caesar. But long story short, he peaked too early. You see, life is like a blank sheet of paper. Some people write good essays, others don't. But what often happens is that a lot of the time, some people write half of a good essay and just brag about it, and realize that they have no ink left in their pen. Many people excel when they're young, but fail miserably when they're older. Take Mozart, for example. His narcissistic father was obsessed with his son being a genius and only taught him about music, leading to Mozart being broke because he had no idea how to handle money because he wasn't taught to. Mozart died poor aged 37. What is most heartbreaking is that as a child, he performed in the royal courts of Germany, France, and other countries. But when he died, penniless and ridden with disease, no one even knew where his grave was. He couldn't even afford to buy a marked grave. You see, the faster you go up, the faster you come down. Ancient Carthage was rich and prosperous, but it was ruled by corrupt and power-hungry oligarchs. On the other hand, Rome at that time wasn't as rich as Carthage, but during times of crisis, its people united, bridging class barriers. From 264 BCE, Rome and Carthage was engaged in a series of wars we now know as the Punic Wars. Ultimately, these wars resulted in the complete victory of Rome and the complete destruction of Carthage. Given that Carthage has more money, more resources, and of course more ships, why did it lose? Well, the answer lies in their culture. You see, culture is a mix of individualism and collectivism. Individualism prioritizes the individual over society's needs, whereas collectivism does the opposite, arguing that individuals need to sacrifice themselves to complement their bigger selves, i.e., their role in society. Extreme individualism will result in anarchy. Extreme collectivism will become a dictatorship. In the case of Carthage, given the country is run by merchants and the main focus of the entire Carthaginian state was to trade, it can be described as individualistic. However, Carthage was also collectivist in the sense that the whole country had to die in wars to benefit its economy. In contrast, individualism in ancient Rome was mainly represented by the cultural focus on education, physical and intellectual growth, and self-improvement, which is what I do. But an essential part of Roman culture is also to sacrifice yourself for the greater good, i.e. the nation. Given that Carthaginian culture reflected only negative aspects about both individualism and collectivism, but Roman society embodied beneficial aspects of these two cultural ideologies. It's probably not surprising that Carthage succumbed whilst Rome prospered. In the 18th century CE, French rulers came up with a clever way to justify their right to the throne. They claimed that God gave them authority over the French, and that their purpose was to carry out God's will in France. This divine right was one of the events which marked the transition of France from a monarchy with limits to an absolute monarchy. But did the French people actually believe this? The answer was yes, at least for a while, given that most French people were illiterate and deeply religious. They accepted this theory. However, a few intellectuals, such as Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau, who spoke out against French authoritarianism, discovered that most people had no idea what freedom was. Then, along with a few other people, launched the cultural and philosophical movement known as the Enlightenment. Enlightenment thinkers thought that humans have infinite potential, and the best way to realize that is to educate the people and establish a political system where everyone is free so they can achieve more. Enlightenment thinking soon spread across Europe, and by that point, most educated people in Europe had already saw the idea that a heavenly appointed king was absolutely ridiculous bullshit. The nobility had failed to fool the people, and now many could see the impact of the French king's absolute rule. The commoners are in poverty, but the nobles were partying. France also had lost many wars during this period, such as the 7 Years' War. The country was going downhill. The authorities decided that if they couldn't trick the people, they might as well brainwash themselves. The nobility kept having fancy balls at Versailles. The Queen Marie Antoinette was wearing a 3-foot-tall wig, and of course the famous quote, "Let them eat cake."
Let them eat cake.
France was growing weaker by the day, yet its nobles kept indulging in meaningless pleasures like cosplaying as farmers and pretending to milk cows. The people had had enough. In World War II, Germany had the best army and strong air force, high-quality tanks, and a fleet of U-boats. They lost. You might say, surely they'll win. So why didn't they? A few reasons. Firstly, Germany prosecuted many Jewish scientists, many of whom helped the Allies to develop the nuke. Secondly, Germany's navy was weak, and they relied only on U-boats. Lastly, Germany made enemies with everyone else in Europe except Italy, and Italy wasn't a good ally for Germany, so Germany was basically fighting alone. This shows us that wars aren't just won with blunt strength, and there are many aspects that determine whether it was a 1 or not. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Good luck.